Starwhite's original galley was a dark, dreary place, fit only for a galley slave. There was very little counter space and a shallow sink. The gimbaled kerosene stove took up most of the galley. There was lots of dark oiled teak and one lonely little light fixture mounted on the forward bulkhead above the sink. Inside the galley lockers was an assortment of wires, loosely spliced together and wrapped in electrical tape. Removing the original kerosene stove and oven gave access to the previously inaccessible area outboard behind the stove. I found that by moving the front of the upper galley cabinet outboard by about 6 inches, we would be able to gain easy access to this space from above. After lots of measuring, templating, and test fitting, the location for the new galley locker front was finalized. It was time to start rebuilding the galley. We removed a section of counter at the back of the original stove cutout. This new opening would become the access to our new locker. Moving the galley cabinet outboard also allowed us to install a larger, deeper sink. We replaced all of the old beige countertops with new white laminate. After removing the section of counter from the stove cutout, we installed the locker's new inboard bulkhead and hinged lid. Under the stove, we built a cabinet to hold our cutting board, silverware drawer, and propane control switch.
This is Starwhite's current galley. Again, as compared to the galley that we got with the boat, things are quite a bit lighter, quite a bit brighter. All of the trim around the galley and chart table area was stripped to bare wood and then varnished with a clear varnish, giving us a much lighter, brighter look to the galley itself. We replaced the galley sink. The original one was only maybe 4 inches deep. This one, I believe, is 10 inches, if I remember correctly. We also installed a foot pump with a spigot. And by working this foot pump carefully, you can wash both hands at the same time, rather than the old style plunger pump that only allowed one hand at a time to be washed. One of the most significant changes we made to Starwhite is access to this area that's behind the stove and outboard and under the locker. Some Westsail 28s have had a removable board in the bottom here, but that doesn't really do you a whole lot of good for accessing things in that it's way back and way down. What we did is we made the countertop with a piano hinge, so it lifts up, and that gives us access to all sorts of storage. This is our canned and dry goods locker. It is somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 cubic feet of space. I can't emphasize how valuable that space is, especially on a small boat like this. The locker doors in the back of the galley, we added shelving on one side. It just makes things a bit more efficient, and then went with sliding doors. This area over here is just sort of a catch-all area. We've made a number of modifications to the galley over the years. The most significant one being we've installed a propane stove. The boat originally had a 2-burner kerosene stove that had a broiler in it. It was not dependable, it was messy to deal with. We instead modified the space here, added this drawer, this propane switch, and this cutout here, which actually holds a cutting board that fits on top of the stove. Down below the stove, there's a pair of double doors. We have all kinds of pots and pans stored down into there. When we installed this Galley stove, we had a choice. It came with gimbals, or it could be hard mounted like what we've done here. We debated about it a bit. If we used the gimbals, we would have had to leave some space on the bottom and in back in order for the stove to swing. We chose instead to hard mount it. Part of the reason we decided to go with the hard mount was that we do have these supports that come with the stove. They hold the pots quite nicely in place when things are a little nasty. Now obviously if you're out there in huge seas and big winds, you're probably not going to be wanting to try and cook anything. But for basic rolling, or even when we're sailing on a bit of a heel, we find that these brackets work just fine. There's one for each of the burners. We've just got one installed at the moment here. This is what the stove looks like with the cutting board that was down below in this slot, now slotted into position on top of the stove. Greatly increases the counter space. If we're making sandwiches, or for that matter anything that doesn't require cooking, having this cutting board in place makes things much easier and gives a whole lot more counter space. The cutting board on the stove is a simple matter to release. You'll simply lift it out and slide it down below into its little storage space.